So after learning some rule, difference rule, and some rules with complex names, let's move on to the next set of rules, which is the product rule, quotient rule, and the chain rule, which are one of the most important and crucial rules in differentiation. So let's start with the product rule. So if you have a function, say s of x, I'm too obsessed with that name, s of x, and you are asked the s of x is given sine x, the product of sine x and x cube, and you are asked the s prime of x. I'm using the word prime because most people in the world use this they say this denotation as prime, and some people say it as s dash of x, and some people say this notation as s prime of x. So let's say it's s prime of x, and which is the same as the derivative of the function s of x. So you know how to take the derivative of sine x, you know how to take the derivative of x cube. So these two are the differentiable functions, so you can treat them independently. So you can take them as f of x and g of x. So these two functions are sine x and x cube respectively. Yeah, so these are the two functions, and you are asked the s prime of x, which is the derivative of the main function. So it's pretty easy. According to the product rule, you might think that it is the product of the derivatives of the two functions, but it's not true. Here's the catch. Product rule is different from sum rule and the difference rule. The product rule says that if you have a function, say s of x, yeah, I'm using this name lots of times. I'm going to use a different name next time, I promise. So you have this function which is the product of two differentiable functions, f of x and multiplied by g of x. So you have these two functions which are differentiable, and the product of these two functions is the main function. And if you want the s prime of x, and so that will be effectively g of x multiplied by the derivative of f of x added with the product of f of x as it is multiplied by the derivative of the second function. Yeah, so in this case, in the case which we were discussing here, so in this case, in the s of x case, we will write it as the s prime of x will be uh, say g of x. So what is g of x? As it is x cube. What is the derivative of the first function, the f of x function? The derivative of sine x is cos x. Now here many students make mistake uh, in this chart right here. If there is sine x, many students get confused with the minus, the negative sign here. So if you have a sine, if you want to derive sine x, they will write it as minus cos x, but what is given here is given, so you can't confuse it with anything. So some people just make an extra negative sign, or they just forget to write the negative sign which is already there. So hopefully we'll not forget anytime. So the derivative of sine x is just cos x, and then we have to add the first function which is sine x multiplied by the derivative of the second function. So the derivative of x cube is 3x squared. So this is the answer, and this is the product rule which we were talking about. and the equation for the product rule is given here. Oh, that line is going haywire. Yeah, so I'll draw a straight line for you. So this is the function enclosed in the box. This is all the function that is there. So it is the product rule which we were discussing about. Let's move on to the quotient rule. So what is the quotient rule? So say we have t of x. I'm changing the name, if you notice, and I'm changing the color too. Let's make it a little bit more colorful. So there is a function t of x which is cos x into, say, x raised to 5. Okay, let's have e raised to x here. Yeah, so you know how to differentiate cos x, you know how to differentiate e raised to x. So what's the catch here? um, so it will be the product rule, but what if we have the division of the both? So what if we have this function as cos x divided by e raised to x? So this is a pretty weird and complicated function, but it is given. What can we do? So you have to find the t prime of x, which is the derivative of the main function. You know how to derive cos x, you know how to derive e of x, e raised to x, sorry. So how can we do it? So here comes the quotient rule. So according to the quotient rule, if we have two differentiable functions which are divided by each other, so one function divided by the other function, so we have f of x divided by g of x. So this is the division sign and not the differentiation sign. So we have f of x divided by g of x. So what will be the dy by dx, or the d by dx of this function f of x? So what will be this? This and this is one and the same. So what will be the derivative of the functions, for the function where two differentiable functions are divided by each other? So in this case, here comes the quotient rule. So by quotient rule, the t dash of x will become g of x, as it is we are writing g of x, and then the derivative of, or the f prime of x, subtracted by, so there is a minus sign, f of x as it is, multiplied by the derivative of g of x, so g prime, and there is also a division sign, and divided by g of x squared. So this is the quotient rule. uh, if we have this function, let's solve for this function, and in this case, what is the f of x? We have taken it independently. So what is the f of x? It is cos x. And what is the g of x? It is e raised to x. Yeah, so first we have to write the second function, which is the g of x, as it is. So we'll write e raised to x. We'll write the first function's derivative, or the derivative of f of x, which will be minus sin x Let's move on. Then we can write the first function as it is, and the derivative of the second function. So what is the derivative of the second function? It's the same, it remains the same. It is a very strong thing, so it is stronger than the shield of Captain America. Yeah. So divided by the squared of the second function, so it will be e raised to 2x. So remember this right here. I'll do it in steps for you. So it is e raised to x, the whole squared. So the anything will be anything in the brackets and is at an exponent, so it will get multiplied. So e raised to 2x, so which is here. Yeah. So this is the answer. Yeah. So we have learned the product rule, the difference rule, the quotient rule. I uh, get confused between the names of the difference rule and the quotient rule, because the quotient is not a very intuitive way of calling it, but it's okay. So the answer to this, the simplified answer will be somewhat like, let's put out the minus sign and the bracket. So it will be, let's put a multiplication sign here and a minus sign here. So it will be minus e raised to x into sine of x minus cos of x into e raised to x divided by e raised to 2x. So this is the derivation of the function t of x, where t of x is cos of x divided by e of x. If you want to memorize this or something like that, you can take a screenshot of this page right here. So this is the product rule and this is the quotient rule. So just take a screenshot of this, and in the next video we'll talk about the chain rule.